Well, what we are going to do is finish up this series that we've been in called Trigger Happy. Have you been enjoying this series? Yeah, fantastic. So, just so you know, kind of what we're talking about tonight, all of what we're talking about tonight is the topic of addiction. And you may be thinking, if you walked in today, well, I'm not necessarily addicted to anything. And I think it's a common misconception to think alcohol or drugs. And while those are two very real things you can be addicted to, I'm just going to kind of run you through some percentages, some numbers today that I was just looking through. So drug use in the years of 2016 to 2020 went up 61% in middle schoolers. So 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, it went up 61%. 62% of teenagers in 11th or 12th grade have abused alcohol. 94% of individuals have been exposed to pornography by the age of 14. So why are we talking about these things? You may not specifically deal with those, but I'm sure you have a friend or a loved one that does. And really what it comes down to is this sense of relief, this sense of a void that we have to fill, and so we fill it with something. And so things in life can be stressful. We're aware of that. All of us will experience something in our lives that takes place that we have to learn how to manage. And so what do we manage that with? So tonight what we're going to do is talk to two of our good friends, but also vocal leaders in our recovery ministry here at the Connection Church, Genesis Recovery. Yeah, you can give some noise for that. Luke and Gretchen Clark. And what you're going to do and what I want from you, I want you to pay more attention than you ever have before in your entire life. Because what they're going to do is literally walk you through what their life looked like. And what I want you to do is key in, lean in for the next 20 minutes and 56 seconds, if you can do that. I know school's almost out, but just hone in for the next 20 minutes and really just think about, have I struggled with this? What can I walk away with? And if you haven't, who do you know that does? And what can you walk away with in that? So obviously my name's Rowdy. If you haven't got a chance to meet me, awesome. This is my wife. This is my wife, Megan.
I'm Megan.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then we'll go for it.
Okay, I'm Gretchen Clark.
I'm Luke Clark.
So let's go through just the basics. How long have you two been married? Kids? What do you do for a living? Let's go there.
We've been married 21 years.
Come on.
We've got two incredible kids. Some of you know them. If you don't, you should.
Yeah.
I get paid to kill things for a living. I do pest control.
Pest control. I just want to make sure. Pest control.
So I kill by day and I save by night.
Yeah, let's go.
I'm a paralegal. My day job is a paralegal. So
Can you explain that? Because I read that and I have no idea what that means. So can you, I'm just being honest. I'm saving
Sure.
you guys from asking that question.
So I do a lot of clerical type things in a law office.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, great. What I want to establish here too is, I've said this before, and maybe I'll say it a different way tonight, but I think we think of God, we think of rules that we have to follow. And I just want to tell you, God is not some cosmic killjoy who's just roaming about the halls of heaven looking at how to make your life more difficult, to make you follow rules. Jeremiah 29:11 lets us know, and maybe you're familiar with this verse, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans that prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And if we can look at these rules as a plan for our life, that when we follow them, there's so much there, so much joy, so much purpose. And so as we navigate this conversation, again, it's not to any of the series I've been walking through, is not to judge anybody or condemn anybody, but to simply put practical steps in people's hands. So let's walk through upbringing, and then I promise I'm done talking. Gretchen, what was your upbringing as a child like?
So I was born and raised in church. My parents were very involved in church. So I grew up in a very Christ-centered house my entire life. In youth group, all the things.
I was the opposite of that. I grew up in a very broken home. I was born into this world an addict. Both of my parents were addicts. They divorced when I was about 5 years old. And so my idea and viewpoint of parents was quite a bit different. After my parents got divorced, my mom then remarried and married into the Mormon church. And so a lot of my younger years, I was brought up Mormon. So it was a very confusing time for me.
Can you walk us through, I believe just in our conversation, the first addiction, the first substance, the first thing you tried to fill with was alcohol, fill that void with was alcohol. Can you walk us through that start to the height of it?
So I actually started drinking hard alcohol at the age of 7 with my father. And my father was an addict, so he thought it was the only way he knew that he could bond with me. So I remember at 7 years old, crawling through the halls because I couldn't walk. I was so drunk. And we actually had an entire shelf that was lined with fifths of tequila. And he would write the dates and of the weekend that we just got completely annihilated. And at 7 years old, I had no idea that it was wrong. That it wasn't it wasn't the norm. It wasn't just what everybody did. And I remember I had accidentally said something to my mom about it, and she was just flabbergasted. And then, of course, all of the chaos that ensued from that. But that was really how I thought that's how you build a relationship between father and son. And so it got very difficult.
And so from alcohol, it led to...
From alcohol, it really just progressed, and it didn't all happen at once. I know my 13th birthday, my dad had bought me an eighth of weed, and again, I thought that was normal, but I actually started using drugs about at the age of 12, and just started smoking pot, and I really for me, it wasn't really about the drugs. I just wanted to feel a little bit different. And that was one easy way for me to not have to deal with the issues with my parents and with school. And I really struggled in school. So it was one area where you could have this amazing group of friends that we all did the same thing, even though we didn't really know each other and really care about each other, but it was this unity that we had, and it was that family that I thought that I always wanted, because we all had that one thing in common that we did together.
And when did you and Gretchen meet? When did your guys' relationship blossom?
So we originally met when I was 16, and he was sober at that time. We started dating about 4 years after that.
And so you were sober, Luke. Was there something that triggered that before, from the age of 12 to that point in time when you and Gretchen met, that some things just kind of changed?
So yeah, at the age of 13 was when 13, 14, everything really hit the height, and started huffing WD-40 and gasoline, and was just doing everything I could just to get a buzz, and nothing was working. I just had this hole that was inside of me that nothing would fill, and so it was at that point that I just figured I was broken, that there was nothing that was ever going to fix me, and I'd never be okay. And that's when I had a friend come over. And he came down into my room, and I was actually hanging in my room. And I figured if I just killed myself, I would do everybody a favor. And at that point was when my mom was really clued into, that there's something going on. There's something we need to deal with. And from then, I spent probably the next year of my life in different treatment centers and hospitals in other states. Whether it was for attempted suicides or for drug abuse. And so it was about when I was 15 years old, I actually got sober. I was a 15-year-old kid going to AA meetings, and I lost every single one of my friends. That nobody wanted to admit that they had a problem, and I had to disassociate from all of that. It was, for me, school was like being a kid in a candy store, and you just say, you can't touch any of this. And so my entire life was uprooted, and at 15 and a half, I ended up leaving, and I lived on the streets for a while, and then I've just was kind of on my own from there.
So you were, go ahead, were you gonna say something?
So yeah, I had found sobriety. And I was no longer using drugs, and I wasn't trying to harm myself, but there was still I was still missing something. Like something still just didn't feel right. But I just kept plugging along with life. I dealt with a lot of the issues, but I didn't feel that I had actually gotten to the core of what was really going on. So I had that sobriety and finally tricked her into dating me. And it was, so even before her, I never wanted to be married. It was sick and evil to me. I saw what it did to my family, and everyone in my family has been divorced, and just the trauma that it caused. And the minute I met her, everything changed. We dated for 3 months. I proposed. We were married 9 months later, and now we've been together 21 years.
Come on. So y'all, you meet, I know you fast forwarded there, but you met. When you guys met, was there a conversation between the two of you? I know you had mentioned, I want to get into that too, the I dealt with it. I think you had said something like that, like I dealt with it, but there was the why behind it. Was there a conversation between the two of you? Did you know? What does that look like, Gretchen?
There was a conversation, yeah. When we started dating, he did tell me that he was an addict, he was sober, all these things. And he likes to tell me that he warned me, like, I warned you I had all these issues. But my experience was, my dad was an alcoholic, and he quit drinking before I was born, and I never saw him touch another drink. And so when he said, I'm an alcoholic, I was like, oh, okay, he's like my dad. And that was a naive thought, but yeah, so that's what I was expecting, was a recovering alcoholic that wouldn't have any issues in the future.
And you had been through it, done all the steps, checked all the boxes, I would say, and you didn't get to the why, which still left that gaping void, that gaping hole. It's like, hey, I need to fill this with something. I need to put something in here that's going to give me purpose. It's going to allow me to feel something. So you were sober until you guys got married. How long did sobriety last into your guys' marriage?
It was probably 6-8 years, and things were great. And I think part of it is I was really trying to fill the void with everything else. Having an amazing wife, and I had a phenomenal business, and I lost all of my priorities, and I started focusing on all of the wrong things. And for me, it was about how much money can I make, and how big of a house can I have? And really, I was wanting to provide for my family. It wasn't all just ego, but through that, I was losing who I was. And then we had a catastrophic event that happened with the business, and all of a sudden, like, the business just wasn't making any money, and it was all my fault, is what I told myself, is that I'm a failure. And all of the other emotions that I had from before is that I'm a failure and I'll never be good enough, all just came rushing back. And I was hanging out with the wrong group of people, and I just ended up falling right back into it. Started doing ecstasy and while I was working, and then doing cocaine, and it all just kept progressing further and further. And at the same time, I couldn't tell my wife and my best friend, the person that had been there through everything for me, and I was back to being absolutely alone. It had nobody and nothing.
So when you started using again, when you slipped back into it, by the time Gretchen found out, or you told her, how much time had transpired from when you started to when Gretchen found out? Years, months?
Probably 4 years.
4 years.
That I just hid absolutely everything.
Okay. And in that 4 years, Gretchen, as your best friend, as your husband, is going through this, at what point did you know that he was struggling?
I knew that he was struggling, but in my mind, he was just having a mental health crisis, you know. I knew he was struggling with drugs when he got fired from a job, and I had to go pick him up, and that's when he told me. And it's interesting, you hear Luke say, like, he felt so alone, but in those 4 years that I watched his struggle, we had the same feelings. Like, I was so alone, and just watching your best friend through the worst time of his life.
And it was, all of the internalizing that you would do is that in my mind, like, I'm not telling her because I'm protecting her and I'll hide her from it, and all of these rationalizations. And if I could have just at some point said something beforehand, and even once she knew, I couldn't stop at that point. I didn't know how. I had actually, once I had been sober, I was a drug and alcohol counselor for an adolescent facility. I'd been through AA meetings. I had been to all of these inpatients, all of these outpatients. I'd been through counseling for years. And here I was back in the same spot. So that feeling of hopelessness and despair was overwhelming.
So I want to get back into where you're at in this moment. You said you felt alone. Was that something you were dealing with personally, or was that when you found out, now I have this and I can't share?
Both. You know, when I thought it was just depression, I was like, okay, he'll get over it. Didn't really reach out. When I found out it was drugs, then I had a secret too. And that's one of the things I would do differently. One of the many things I would do differently if I went back is not keep that secret. Because that secret was not only hard for me, but it was hard for him. Like, he didn't pursue help. I wasn't getting help. People were not supporting us while we were going through this. So again, like, I was alone. He was alone doing his thing. And it was tough. It was a struggle. Not only to watch him going through this relapse and this drug use and not knowing if I'm going to come home and find him dead one day. Like, that was my fear on the daily, was I had to get in and find out where my husband was, because I didn't want my little kids to walk in and find their dad, you know. So if I could do it differently, I definitely would. I would reach out to the community that we have here at church and just ask for help. And if at least one person was just praying for me would have made a huge difference. You know, if one person was just checking in on us, would have made such a difference.
I want to ask a two-part question, really the same question to both of you from your perspectives at that point, or even Luke when you were younger, as a teenager in the room who's watching their best friend go through that. I know you just said talking, but what would you tell them? Like, what are some things, knowing what you know now, what are some things, whether it's a red flag or whether it's something that's like, what would you tell somebody who's has a friend who's struggling with that?
I guess the first thing I would say is you're not alone, and you don't have to do this alone. And if you're worried about your friend, it's okay to talk to them about it, to tell them that you're worried about it, because they probably want to hear from you too. They probably want to know that there's someone that knows they're struggling or that can see that they're struggling. But you don't have to do it alone. If you're worried about your friend, then reach out to someone here at church, someone that you trust, to just pray with you on how to approach that friend or talk to them about what you're seeing.
And then, Luke, what would you say to somebody who is maybe finds himself in the same shoes as you? So maybe doesn't have a friend, but they themselves are struggling with these things.
It's really the same. I mean, you're not alone. As we hear our stories, is that the enemy convinces all of us, and it doesn't matter what the problem is in our life, is that you're alone, don't talk about it. Like, if the enemy can convince us of that, he has completely blocked us off from everybody else. So I know it sucks. And you don't want people like, we have this, like, we need to, I felt like I had to put on this persona of who I am, that I'm a good son, I'm a good student, I'm a good dad, and that if it all comes crashing down, I have nothing left. But if I could have just let one person in, if there would have been one person in my team that said, hey, you know what? I don't know what's going on, but I'm here if you need to talk, I don't know what would have changed. And so if it's you, talk about it. Find somebody, even if it's some old dude like me, like talk about it. Like, you're not alone in the situation. All of the lies that are inside of your head is that they're going to judge me. Like, it's just not true. Take a little bit of faith and hope, and you don't have to be stuck inside of that.
So at what point did the trajectory of, after everything had transpired with finding out Luke has been doing drugs has fallen back into his addiction for these last 4 years, at what point did things start to turn around for y'all?
Luke kind of hit a spot where it really didn't matter what I said to him. I begged or pleaded or whatever. But when he got to a spot where he knew he had to do something differently, and he found the Genesis process, that is really what made a huge difference in both of our lives.
What explain to us, because you lead Genesis process now.
Yeah.
Explain real quick what that looked like going into that. I guess Luke, just kind of jumping in, when you found it, how'd you find it? What did it look like for you?
I was really at the spot where I was ready to do anything. You told me to jump up and down on one foot and quack like a chicken, or squawk like a chicken, something like a chicken. I'd have done it. Is that I needed something. And our church at the time had been doing this Genesis process and talked about for addiction. And I really didn't have any hope, but I was willing to give anything a shot. And I had been sober, I think, a couple of weeks at that point, and started the Genesis process. And what happened through there, everything changed for me. I understood why I was doing what I was doing, and knowing the why I was doing it, I could address how not to. When before, it really was like, well, just don't use drugs. Yeah, super simple. But it wasn't. Not for me, because it was the way that I knew that I could change how I felt, and in a moment's notice, I could forget about everything that was going on.